On the night of April 22, 2023, in a quiet residential pocket of northwest Las Vegas, 26-year-old Tabitha Tozzi stepped out of a friend's apartment just after 10:45 p.m. She was wearing black jeans, a denim jacket, and white sneakers, dressed for comfort, not for trouble. Nothing in her demeanor raised concern. No visible argument, no sign of distress. She said goodbye, walked to her white Hyundai Elantra, and drove away into the darkness. She never made it home. By the following morning, her car was found 2 blocks from her apartment. The driver's side door was unlocked. The keys were left in the cup holder. Her phone rested on the passenger seat, powered off. Her purse lay untouched in the back. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no signs of a struggle. The vehicle was in perfect condition. It was as if Tabitha had parked, stepped out, and disappeared into nothing. Her mother, Regina Lacerda, called 911 at 6:43 p.m. the next evening. She didn't answer her phone all day, she told dispatch. That's not like her. Officers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department arrived shortly after. A welfare check was conducted at Tabitha's apartment. No signs of forced entry. Everything in place. Her flat iron was still warm in the bathroom. Her cat hadn't been fed. The apartment smelled faintly of bleach. It wasn't officially a crime scene yet. At that stage, LVMPD treated it as a standard missing person case. Tabitha had no history of mental illness, no history of disappearing, but she was an adult. Technically, she had the right to vanish. That technicality would cost investigators precious time. It wasn't until the 3rd day that the case was escalated to homicide. By then, the evidence had already started to turn. Investigators secured surveillance footage from the neighborhood. At 2:13 a.m. on April 23rd, nearly 4 hours after Tabitha was last seen, a Ring doorbell camera caught a grainy silhouette exiting her vehicle. The footage showed a figure wearing a hoodie walking away from the car before disappearing off frame. The timestamp aligned precisely with the last known activity from Tabitha's phone, which went dark around 2:15 a.m. Data confirmed the phone had traveled several miles from where the vehicle was later discovered, then powered down or destroyed. Her last text message, sent at 2:07 a.m. to a close friend, read, "He's acting weird again, I'm scared." The recipient never saw the message until it was too late. At the vehicle, a red smear was found near the seatbelt buckle. It had been partially cleaned. Luminol revealed additional blood traces on the passenger side floor mat. The purse in the back seat contained $43 in cash, an unopened makeup palette, and a small canister of pepper spray. The pepper spray showed no signs of use. Back at her apartment, a single blonde hair, distinct from Tabitha's naturally dark brown, was found on the inside doorknob. It didn't match her DNA. Near the kitchen sink, technicians noted a thin chemical sheen on the countertop. Swabs confirmed diluted blood residue beneath the bleach. It wasn't a lot, but it was there. Tabitha had previously filed a harassment complaint in late 2022. That report was withdrawn less than 2 weeks later. At the time, the man involved wasn't charged. His name was redacted in the official record. When asked by police about the report, her mother said she didn't know all the details. She didn't talk about him much anymore. Said she was done, Regina told detectives. But sometimes I think she was still scared. Her friends described Tabitha as careful but private. She lived alone, worked promotional events and modeling gigs. She kept a tight circle. There were no active dating profiles, no suspicious messages in her phone. Nothing in her digital life stood out, until investigators dug deeper. A week before she vanished, Tabitha had searched the term, "how to document harassment." Her internet history showed multiple visits to domestic violence resource pages. None of that had been shared with friends or family. At that point, her disappearance had not yet been classified as a homicide, but the indicators were piling up. Officers began retracing her final movements. They knew she had been at her friend Lisa's apartment that night. Lisa was cooperative. She remembered Tabitha leaving around 10:45 p.m., walking alone to her car. No one else was at the apartment. No argument, no strange behavior. Phone GPS logs showed that Tabitha's phone left Lisa's complex, headed south, made a detour along a side street off Craig Road, then stopped near her apartment around midnight. That part aligned with where the vehicle was later found. But there was a second location, a stretch of land several miles west, near undeveloped desert terrain, where the phone had paused for several minutes at 2:10 a.m. before shutting off. A search team was deployed to that secondary site. What they found would shift the case entirely. A denim jacket, half buried in a sand wash, torn and stained with blood. It was later confirmed to be Tabitha's. Forensics recovered two partial fingerprints from a button, one consistent with Tabitha's, the other unidentified. There were tire tracks nearby. No body, no wallet, no phone. LVMPD shifted gears. The case was now active homicide. An internal profile was opened with the FBI Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. A behavioral analyst was consulted. The profile suggested the killer was someone known to Tabitha, someone with control, opportunity, and a reason to silence her. Detectives turned back to her withdrawn police report. They got a name. They didn't release it. Not yet. Instead, they issued a bulletin. Public appeal for tips, reward fund established, local news stations ran her story. Still, no one came forward with useful information. The person of interest had already vanished. By the end of that week, the pressure was mounting. The community was paying attention. The bleach, the phone, the jacket in the sand, it was too much to ignore. And yet there was still no body, no murder weapon, no confession, only the silence where Tabitha Tozy used to be. As investigators reconstructed the final 72 hours of Tabitha Tozy's life, attention shifted toward her inner circle. The digital forensics team prioritized phone logs, text threads, and deleted message recovery. The focus wasn't on how she disappeared anymore, but why. Over a 5-day period leading up to her vanishing, Tabitha exchanged 87 messages with one specific number not stored in her contacts. Most were brief. The tone changed in the last 48 hours. Shorter replies, long pauses between responses, and the appearance of unsent drafts on her device. One recovered message, timestamped 2 hours before her final text, was never sent. "I don't feel safe tonight." Detectives interviewed her closest friends. Lisa Guerra, who last saw her, stated during a taped interview, "She didn't seem okay that week. She didn't want to talk about it, but she wasn't sleeping right, kept checking her phone." A friend named Nikki Rodriguez, who lived out of state, shared that Tabitha had mentioned being followed a few weeks prior. She brushed it off. She said someone was watching her car but didn't want to go to the cops again. Investigators retrieved call logs from Tabitha's service provider. On April 18th, she made a 27-minute call to the domestic violence hotline. The content of the call is confidential, but the timestamp is noted in the case file. That was the same day she had searched online for how to file for a restraining order in Nevada. No such order was filed. Her mother, Regina Lacerda, was re-interviewed on April 26th. She disclosed that Tabitha had changed her locks 2 months earlier and added a second deadbolt to her front door. She said it was just a precaution, Regina told detectives, but then she stopped using her front door altogether, started parking around the corner and coming in through the back patio. A behavioral analyst flagged this as an indicator of surveillance avoidance, consistent with stalking victims. At this point, detectives requested expanded access to Tabitha's cloud backups. Deleted media revealed several photographs taken from inside her car. A white SUV parked behind her on multiple occasions, including outside her workplace and her gym. The license plate was partially captured in one image. DMV cross-reference identified the vehicle as registered to a 26-year-old male, previously linked to a dropped misdemeanor domestic battery charge. The name was familiar. It matched the redacted individual from Tabitha's withdrawn 2022 harassment report. Investigators had a pattern forming. They had a timeline, but they still had no suspect in custody and no confirmation of his current whereabouts. Forensics returned preliminary results from the blood found in the Elantra. It was a match to Tabitha. The smear on the seatbelt buckle had been partially wiped, but still contained epithelial cells. Analysts concluded that Tabitha had bled in the passenger seat, most likely while restrained. There was no indication she ever moved to the rear of the vehicle. Toxicology panels on the recovered jacket found no drugs or sedatives. The tear along the inner collar showed signs of forced removal. Further fiber testing indicated transfer from a latex glove. No prints were recovered from the fabric. On April 29th, detectives conducted an unannounced interview with Tabitha's ex-boyfriend's former roommate. The individual confirmed that he had not seen the man in over a week. He believed the suspect had left town, possibly heading south. Said he had things to handle in Sonora, the roommate told police. Didn't say when he'd be back. That was the first reference to Mexico. FBI joined the case officially on May 1st under joint jurisdiction with LVMPD's Violent Crimes Division. A federal warrant was issued for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. The suspect's name was placed in the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, database. Border Patrol and Customs were alerted. His phone had been turned off since April 24th. No digital activity, no bank transactions. It was a clean disappearance, one that suggested planning. Investigators circled back to a critical detail, the GPS stop in the desert. A second ground search was initiated. This time, canine units were deployed. On May 4th, a shallow grave was located near the wash where her jacket had been found. It had partially collapsed from rainfall, exposing human remains. The body was identified through dental records. Cause of death, single gunshot wound to the back of the head, fired at close range. No casings were recovered. The grave contained a single personal item, a silver ring with a floral engraving confirmed to belong to Tabitha. With homicide now confirmed and the prime suspect believed to be out of the country, the case entered a new phase. Prosecutors prepared to file charges in absentia. A federal extradition request was initiated. Tabitha's family was notified privately before the public announcement. Regina did not speak at the press briefing. She stood behind detectives as the news was delivered. This was not a disappearance, LVMPD spokesperson said. This was a homicide, and we will pursue justice wherever he is. After confirming the recovery of Tabitha Tozzi's remains from the shallow grave off Washburn Road, the Clark County Coroner's Office completed a full forensic autopsy within 48 hours. The cause of death, a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, at close range, downward trajectory, consistent with a kneeling or seated position at time of impact. The entry wound showed no signs of stippling, suggesting the weapon was likely fired through an intermediary object, possibly a fabric barrier or silencer. There were no defensive wounds, no sign of recent sexual trauma. Time of death was estimated between 2:10 and 2:20 a.m. on April 23, 2023, narrowly matching the last known digital footprint from her cell phone. Analysts concluded the grave had been dug in advance due to soil displacement patterns and partial root severance inconsistent with hasty burial. The victim's ring, recovered near the shoulder, contained traces of unidentified blood not matching the victim's DNA. Lab results were pending. With the suspect still at large and believed to be in Mexico, the FBI elevated the case to full international fugitive status. Agents began reviewing the subject's known background, birth records from California, prior residencies in Nevada and Arizona, and one unprosecuted incident from 2020 involving domestic violence in Pima County. No warrants were ever issued in that case, and the female complainant declined to cooperate. The accused had no passport, but likely access to forged documentation through familial ties south of the border. Meanwhile, LVMPD's homicide unit cross-referenced recent cases involving female victims with similar behavioral warning signs, stalking reports withdrawn, anonymous tips that went cold, DV complaints filed and closed prematurely. Investigators focused on one 2018 case in which a woman named Ashley M. had filed a temporary restraining order but later disappeared from public records after relocating out of state. She was contacted and agreed to a voluntary interview. During that conversation, she confirmed having dated the same man years earlier. Her account echoed elements seen in Tabitha's case: monitoring behavior, verbal threats that escalated when challenged, a pet killed in retaliation, and phone GPS being used to track her. Ashley provided screenshots of old text messages, many of which showed language nearly identical to messages recovered from Tabitha's phone. The patterns were consistent and disturbing. Her statement reinforced a behavioral profile already in development. According to the FBI's profiler attached to the case, the subject displayed coercive control tendencies, pattern-based threat escalation, and premeditative violence masked by a superficially non-threatening persona. The timeline of Tabitha's interactions, withdrawn complaints, digital trail cleansing, paranoia, and behavior, mirrored the trajectory found in multiple previous incidents, but hers ended in homicide. Detectives revisited the original harassment complaint filed by Tabitha in 2022. Redacted at the time, it was now unsealed through a court petition. The report included a statement detailing repeated uninvited visits to her residence, persistent texting after breakup, surveillance from a parked vehicle, and threats disguised as warnings. One excerpt read, "If you think you can block me, think again. I know where you sleep." She withdrew the complaint 12 days later, citing pressure from mutual friends and wanting to move on. LVMPD confirmed the report had been marked closed without further action. No follow-up interview had been conducted. No restraining order issued. Internal review flagged the decision as a missed opportunity. During this phase of the investigation, law enforcement obtained financial records of the primary suspect. One debit card, linked to a prepaid account under a known alias, was used on April 24th to purchase gas at a station in Tucson, Arizona, less than 36 hours after Tabitha's confirmed time of death. Security footage placed the individual matching the description at pump #3, wearing a black hoodie and sunglasses. No vehicle plates were visible, but the timestamp helped establish escape trajectory. Forensic techs pulled data from the station's POS system. Fingerprint lift from the keypad was inconclusive, but was retained for future comparison. The footage was submitted for facial recognition enhancement. The vehicle driven by the suspect, believed to be a white 2009 Chevrolet Tahoe, was identified by VIN via registration cross-check. The vehicle had been reported sold in a cash transaction weeks earlier through a private sale site, with no formal title transfer. Investigators believed this was an intentional move to obscure tracking and vehicle ownership. The current location of the vehicle remained unknown. At the request of the FBI, Mexican authorities were provided a detailed dossier, including biometric data, photographs, known aliases, and a copy of the arrest warrant issued in Nevada. The subject's last known family residence was located in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, a region with known cartel presence and limited extradition cooperation unless the fugitive was involved in active crimes in Mexico. While field efforts to locate the suspect continued, the district attorney's office began assembling the prosecutorial timeline. Prosecutors focused on 4 key pillars: forensic evidence, blood in the vehicle, DNA on the seatbelt buckle, and matching fibers on the victim's recovered clothing, digital trace, GPS records, deleted messages indicating fear, unsent drafts, and online search history related to harassment, pattern behavior, corroborated testimony from previous partners, consistent MO, and documented escalation timeline, flight, unauthorized border crossing, concealment efforts, and communication shutdown after the homicide window. Assistant DA Monica Harris noted that even without a body at the time, the case would have likely reached probable cause for arrest. With the recovery of Tabitha's remains, the evidence base was deemed strong enough to sustain full indictment. By mid-May 2023, with the Tabitha Tozzi homicide now classified as a federal fugitive case, LVMPD and FBI focused exclusively on locating the suspect. He was believed to be traveling under an alias in Sonora, Mexico. Multiple leads were shared with Mexican authorities, but no confirmed sightings had yet occurred. That changed on May 18th, when a secondary investigation in Ciudad Obregón surfaced in a local police bulletin. A 29-year-old male had been arrested for possession of an unlicensed firearm in connection with an unrelated shooting. A homicide victim, female, early 20s, had been discovered in a vehicle parked behind an auto repair shop. Ballistic analysis linked the recovered weapon to the scene. The detained suspect provided a false identity, but initial fingerprint comparison through Interpol returned a direct match to the open U.S. fugitive warrant. The man was the same individual wanted for the murder of Tabitha Tozzi. The Mexican authorities confirmed the match with U.S. federal agencies. Due to the severity of the new charges filed under Mexican jurisdiction, extradition would be temporarily delayed. The suspect was remanded into custody at a state detention center pending trial for the new homicide. Through diplomatic channels, U.S. investigators requested access to limited discovery in the new case. Forensic analysts reviewed the crime scene photos from Ciudad Obregón. The female victim was found with a single gunshot wound to the right temple, seated in the front passenger seat of a Nissan sedan. Her purse and ID were missing. There were signs of a physical altercation, including defensive wounds on her forearms. No surveillance footage from surrounding buildings showed the shooting itself, but nearby cameras captured the suspect entering the vehicle alone 2 hours earlier. The victim had reportedly been seen with him at a convenience store the same day. Store footage confirmed their interaction. Forensics examined the firearm, a .380 caliber semi-automatic pistol. It was not registered. Serial number was filed down but partially recoverable. When cross-checked through ATF tracing, it matched the make and model consistent with ballistic evidence found at Tabitha Tozzi's burial site. Although the bullet itself was never recovered from her body, the exit wound characteristics and weapon class aligned. Additionally, investigators requested DNA comparison between the blood found on Tabitha's ring and a sample taken from the Ciudad Obregón suspect. Results confirmed a match. This evidence established a clear forensic connection between the two crimes. At this point, U.S. prosecutors were advised to prepare for an extended delay in repatriating the suspect. Under Mexican law, citizens cannot be extradited until they have resolved active charges within national jurisdiction. While U.S. authorities retained the right to request future extradition, the timeline was uncertain. Despite this obstacle, LVMPD proceeded with their internal case closure report on Tabitha's homicide. A full summary of evidence supporting forensic links and behavioral history was compiled and archived. The case was considered solved pending adjudication. The victim's family was notified of the development. In a written statement, they expressed frustration over the delay but acknowledged the importance of judicial due process in both countries. In June, a translated transcript of the Mexican preliminary hearing revealed the suspect's first formal statement. In it, he denied involvement in Tabitha Tozzi's murder, but admitted to being present during the events leading to the Ciudad Obregón shooting. He claimed the woman had stolen from him and that the firearm had discharged during a struggle. No remorse was expressed. No mention of the Nevada homicide was made. The Mexican judge ordered continued detention without bail. Back in Nevada, the investigation team prepared to present their final case report to the district attorney's office. Prosecutors began drafting a sealed indictment detailing 2 counts: first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping. Supplementary charges included evidence tampering, unlawful disposal of a human body, and use of a firearm in commission of a felony. Digital records remained central to the strength of the case. This included GPS logs showing travel from Tabitha's residence to the burial site, deleted message recovery that demonstrated intent and prior threats, metadata from photo evidence taken by Tabitha documenting stalking activity, voice print analysis comparing audio from a recovered voicemail to the suspect's booking audio in Mexico. Each piece reinforced the prosecution's theory of a premeditated, pattern-driven crime with a predictable escalation. Public statements from law enforcement remained measured. No press conference was held until further progress on the extradition front could be confirmed. However, the case was cited internally as an example of multi-jurisdictional coordination involving cyber forensics, behavioral profiling, and cross-border law enforcement cooperation. The FBI's Behavioral Threat Assessment Unit classified the offender as a high-control, high-escalation risk offender with the potential for repeated lethal violence against women in proximity relationships. Their recommendation included continued international monitoring post-sentencing should he ever be returned to the U.S. Following the suspect's detention in Mexico and the confirmation of his connection to Tabitha Tozzi's homicide, U.S. investigators shifted focus to establishing a full behavioral and relational profile. The priority was to reconstruct the evolution of his relationship with the victim using documented communications, witness statements, and police records, particularly to identify early signs of escalation that were either dismissed or overlooked. The subject's name was now confirmed: Oswaldo Nathanael Perez Sanchez, born in Los Angeles County, California, 1997. His criminal history was minimal on record: one charge of misdemeanor battery in 2020 that was dropped due to lack of cooperation from the victim. However, informal interviews and archival social data suggested a pattern of coercive behavior predating any formal complaint. Investigators compiled digital data spanning from January 2022 through April 2023, focusing on communications between Perez Sanchez and Tabitha. This included text messages, social media DMs, and voicemail metadata recovered from cloud backups and subpoenas to third-party platforms. The messages showed a progressive change in tone, from affectionate to accusatory, from daily check-ins to persistent surveillance and blame. One early message, sent February 12, 2022, read, "You didn't answer for 2 hours. Where were you and who were you with?" By November 2022, his messages included statements such as, "You think you can ghost me? I know your habits better than you do." Tabitha had not responded to over 60% of his last 200 messages. Friends and acquaintances were re-interviewed to contextualize the progression. One of Tabitha's co-workers confirmed she had stopped mentioning his name altogether in early 2023. She said she blocked him but wasn't sure it mattered. He always found another number. Another witness described seeing Perez Sanchez's vehicle parked 2 blocks from Tabitha's apartment on multiple occasions, sometimes late at night, engine running. A former roommate of the suspect, interviewed voluntarily, described Perez Sanchez as possessive in his prior relationships and confirmed that he kept a spreadsheet listing people he had conflicts with. Tabitha's name appeared in it, labeled "Account Open." Detectives obtained audio logs from Tabitha's voicemail backup. One recording, dated 3 weeks before her death, included the following excerpt. "I'm not the guy you can just delete. You're not going to pretend I don't exist. Don't make me come find you." The voicemail was marked as unplayed. Investigators believe Tabitha had deliberately avoided listening to it. A sealed family court document revealed that Perez Sanchez's previous partner had requested an emergency protection order in 2019, citing threats and stalking. The case was dismissed before a hearing due to the petitioner leaving the state. The document included a statement from her affidavit. "He followed me twice after work. He told me, if you don't want to be with me, you won't be with anyone else." LVMPD's internal risk management team conducted a retroactive analysis of system alerts tied to domestic violence behavior patterns. In that review, it was determined that the 2022 harassment complaint filed by Tabitha had triggered a Level 2 risk flag in their system. However, due to her voluntary withdrawal of the complaint and lack of a filed restraining order, no follow-up investigation was launched. The team acknowledged procedural gaps in connecting withdrawn complaints with repeat offenders across jurisdictions. FBI profilers finalized their assessment in June 2023. Their report stated that Perez Sanchez maintains a pattern of control-oriented behavior targeting former intimate partners, characterized by emotional coercion, digital intrusion, geographic stalking, and escalation to physical violence when challenged or cut off. The behavioral unit recommended long-term monitoring of similar complaint withdrawals in Clark County and adjacent jurisdictions to identify other potential victims or preventable escalations. A new witness came forward in July 2023 after recognizing the suspect's name from a news article. She had met Perez Sanchez briefly through a dating app in 2021. Their exchange lasted less than 3 weeks, but she reported similar red flags: controlling language, pressure to respond quickly, and uninvited appearances at her job site. The woman had blocked him and never filed a report, but her screenshots showed messages identical in tone and language to those sent to Tabitha. Investigators confirmed the number he used matched one already cataloged in their file. The woman's interview was recorded and submitted as part of the ongoing pattern evidence package. Prosecutors believed it could be used in a future trial under Rule 404(b) for prior bad acts relevant to intent and motive. Tabitha's digital calendar showed that she had begun tracking unusual activity in the weeks before her disappearance. A recurring note labeled "Check Surroundings" was logged every night at 8:30 p.m. Her browser history showed multiple visits to concealed carry license application pages and personal safety blogs. She had not submitted any formal application for firearm ownership. Her final saved note, timestamped April 21st at 5:48 p.m., read, "This is getting worse." As of August 2023, the suspect in Tabitha Tozzi's homicide remained in custody in Mexico, facing trial for an unrelated murder committed in Ciudad Obregón. The Nevada charges, while fully documented and supported by forensic evidence, could not proceed to trial without extradition. Under Mexican law, individuals must resolve active domestic charges before they can be transferred to another jurisdiction. The United States Department of Justice formally submitted an extradition request under the terms of the U.S.-Mexico Extradition Treaty. The request included a comprehensive case file, arrest warrant, supporting affidavits, forensic lab reports, witness interviews, and digital forensic logs, all translated and notarized according to Mexican federal procedure. The request was received and acknowledged by Mexican judicial authorities, but progress was slow. Mexican legal channels require judicial review before any extradition is authorized, and delays are common in cases involving dual criminal charges. Extradition may be denied outright if the subject is convicted and sentenced to prison within Mexico. If acquitted, the extradition request could still be delayed further by appeals. The Clark County District Attorney's Office continued preparing its case in parallel, treating it as provisionally indicted. Grand jury proceedings were held behind closed doors. A true bill was returned on all major charges, including first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and evidence tampering. The indictment was sealed pending the defendant's physical return to U.S. jurisdiction. Back in Las Vegas, Tabitha's family began public advocacy, using media platforms to raise awareness about the case and its unresolved legal status. Local news coverage increased following a vigil held on the anniversary of her death. Supporters launched a petition urging expedited extradition and the classification of Tabitha's case as a priority file within the DOJ. The suspect's trial in Mexico progressed through the fall. Prosecutors there pursued murder charges with firearm enhancement based on the fatal shooting of a young woman he had reportedly met only days before. While the defense claimed the shooting was accidental, forensic evidence contradicted that version. The trajectory of the bullet, location of the casing, and lack of gunshot residue on the victim's hands all supported intentional homicide. An independent ballistic report, obtained through cooperation between Mexican and U.S. agencies, verified that the weapon used in the Ciudad Obregón killing matched casing marks found in the Nevada case. The FBI crime lab confirmed the ejector mark patterns matched those present on test casings retrieved during the search near Tabitha Tozzi's burial site. The gun was conclusively linked to both murders. Further complicating matters, the suspect's legal representation in Mexico filed motions contesting any future extradition on the grounds of inhumane sentencing exposure, referencing the potential for life without parole under Nevada law. U.S. attorneys responded by clarifying that no death penalty was being sought, but reaffirmed the mandatory sentencing guidelines under NRS 200.030 for premeditated murder. Extradition treaties require dual criminality, meaning the crime charge must be illegal in both countries. While Mexico does not permit life without parole in most cases, the murder itself met that threshold. Still, appeals were expected to delay proceedings for at least 12 to 18 months. During this waiting period, the Clark County Homicide Task Force initiated a cold case audit of prior complaints involving Perez Sanchez. At least 2 other harassment reports had been filed by different women between 2017 and 2021. Neither case led to formal charges. One victim now lived out of state and declined to cooperate. The other had since changed her name and requested confidentiality, but confirmed she had been contacted multiple times by the suspect after ending the relationship. These interviews reinforced the prosecutorial argument for introducing prior bad acts under Rule 404(b) should a U.S. trial ever proceed. Documentation from the audit was added to the sealed indictment packet. Federal agencies maintained surveillance of the suspect's extended family and digital correspondence. No indication of coordinated legal obstruction or witness tampering was found. Still, U.S. Marshals added Perez Sanchez to the International Fugitive Monitoring Database. His case remained a top priority pending file for the DOJ Criminal Division's Office of International Affairs. In parallel, DOJ began drafting contingency plans. If extradition failed, prosecutors could consider filing a civil action for wrongful death to apply pressure, or petition for trial in absentia under extraordinary conditions. Both options were legally possible, but carried significant constitutional challenges and political risks. By December 2023, the U.S. government received confirmation that the suspect had been convicted in the Ciudad Obregón case. He was sentenced to 25 years in a Mexican federal facility with eligibility for parole after 18 years under local statutes. With this outcome, the extradition timeline was effectively frozen until he completed or was released early from his sentence. The DOJ classified the case as prosecutable upon release. All evidence, transcripts, and forensic records were retained under sealed preservation protocols. As of early 2024, the murder case of Tabitha Tozzi remained legally unresolved inside the United States. Although the suspect, Oswaldo Nathaniel Perez Sanchez, had been convicted and sentenced in Mexico for an unrelated homicide, no criminal trial had occurred in Nevada for Tabitha's killing. The evidence was strong, the indictment was sealed, but the extradition was stalled indefinitely. For the Tozzi family, the weight of that reality defined every day since the body was recovered. They had sat through every briefing, read every forensic report, and stood behind law enforcement during every media update. And yet there was no courtroom, no verdict, no cross-examination of witnesses, no sentence read aloud under a state seal. There was no closure, only documentation. In the internal case audit completed by Clark County Homicide Unit, several systemic failures were documented. These were not unique to Tabitha's case, but her outcome made them unavoidable for review. The first point, lack of judicial follow-up after withdrawn complaints. Tabitha had filed a harassment report in 2022, citing persistent contact and surveillance behavior from her ex-boyfriend. The case was marked closed, no further action after she withdrew. There was no referral to victim services, no formal threat assessment, and no inclusion of the case in the jurisdictional watch list for repeat domestic violence behavior. Had it been flagged properly, the pattern of stalking may have triggered earlier intervention. The second point, restraining order policy gaps. Nevada law allows for the issuance of temporary protection orders, TPOs, based on reasonable belief of harm. However, without direct physical violence, such petitions often fall into procedural limbo. Tabitha did not complete the application for a TPO, and even if she had, enforcement across jurisdictions is inconsistently applied. By the time she began documenting her fear digitally, voicemails, deleted texts, photographs, no formal legal protection was in place. National experts reviewing the case pointed out a broader issue. Most domestic homicide cases include pre-incident indicators, but without continuity in victim support, law enforcement data remains fragmented. In Tabitha's case, this fragmentation occurred between police reports, friend testimonies, and digital communications, all seen in isolation until it was too late. The Clark County District Attorney's Office later acknowledged this during a closed press briefing. While the evidence against Perez-Sanchez was extensive and admissible, the systemic failure was in prevention, not prosecution. In the months following the indictment, Tabitha's mother, Regina Lacerda, began working with local advocacy groups focused on intimate partner violence. She pushed for legislative reform in Nevada, specifically around repeat harassment complaints and cross-agency data tracking. Her efforts led to the drafting of a state bill titled SB 294, which proposed the following: mandatory victim follow-up after a withdrawn complaint involving romantic partners, statewide flagging system for individuals named in multiple domestic complaints, regardless of charge status, real-time notification system to victims when a former partner is detained, released, or seeks contact. The bill received bipartisan support and was passed by the Nevada State Senate in early 2024. It was nicknamed Tabitha's Law. At the federal level, DOJ used the case in internal trainings on cross-border extradition limitations and evidence preservation in high-delay prosecutions. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit included it in its 2024 pattern report on coercive control offenders who escalate to lethal violence. In the media, the story faded gradually after the initial sentencing in Mexico. But for law enforcement professionals and domestic violence prevention networks, Tabitha's case remained instructive. The sealed indictment remains active. Perez-Sanchez will face trial in the United States if and when he is ever extradited. His DNA, voice samples, and forensic linkage to the Nevada crime scene are all preserved under federal chain of custody protocols. The digital evidence, including his messages, threats, and surveillance patterns, continues to be used in officer training programs and judicial education modules nationwide. Regina Tosi has not stopped advocating. She participates in annual panels on domestic violence intervention and data interoperability between local and federal systems. In an interview, she stated, "My daughter knew something was going to happen. She tracked it. She warned people. She did everything except survive it. That means we have to fix what didn't work." By the end of 2024, Nevada recorded 3 fewer domestic partner homicide cases than in 2022. While causation could not be proven, victim outreach services reported increased usage of early intervention protocols influenced by policy reforms tied directly to Tabitha's story. If there's one thing I've learned from following Tabitha's case, it's this: sometimes all the warnings are there, all the signs, and yet the system still fails. That's why we can't stay silent. If you're in a relationship where fear feels normal, document everything. Speak up even when it's hard. And if someone around you is isolating, changing routines, or suddenly afraid, you might be their only chance. What do you think could have been done differently in Tabitha's case? Have you or someone you know ever faced something similar? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, comment too, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like the video, let me know why. I welcome honest feedback. If you found this video powerful, Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next real story that could save someone's life.